If you have a small part that's made of steel and you need to give it a little bit of rust protection, and you don't particularly care about heat treatment, then hot bluing is a good option that you can consider. Contradictory to its name, hot bluing doesn't actually bleed the steel. Yes, it takes on like this bluish black hue, but that's for a very different reason than actual bluing. Actually, bluing a steel is when and you put a layer of magnetite onto the steel. The traditional way of doing this is by using a solution to create a thin layer of rust on the steel and then boiling that steel in order to turn the rust into magnetite. In hot bluing, what you're doing is that you're heating up the steel and then you are very rapidly dipping it into a bath of oil. The heat of the steel causes the oil to polymerize on its surface, and that layer of polymer is the thing that gives it this bluish black hue. It's also what gives it a little bit more rust protection. It's the same thing that happens when you season a cast iron pan. When you put oil into a cast iron pan and you season it, you heat it up, the oil polymerizes and it forms this black layer on top of the iron that protects it from rust from the atmosphere. Hot bluing is also a very cheap method of rust protection. In order to perform it, all you require is a gas stove, which you could also substitute for a blowtorch, a bath of oil for it that's enough to submerge the entirety of the part. Here I'm using some leftover palm oil. I would suggest using cooking oil instead of something like machine oil or gear oil. This is because cooking oil tends to polymerize more forgivingly compared to, say, gear oil. I tried it. I did once using transmission oil for my motorcycle. It was not as forgiving as using cooking oil. It was a lot harder to get the correct temperature in order for it to polymerize and not just vaporize into the atmosphere. You also need either a pair of pliers or basically anything that you can use to comfortably hold the part over the fire as you are heating it up. For this example, the part that I am gluing is a little bracelet that I made from some mild steel wires. And you're going to hold the part somewhere where you don't really mind not having it completely blued the first round out of the process. You can blue this multiple times to get a deeper and deeper color, which is what I'm doing later. I'm gonna do two passes of this. You hold that over the stove, and there's two ways you can tell when it's hot enough. If it starts forming an oxide layer, first it'll turn gold, and then a red, and then a violet color, then it gets to light blue. When it reaches that light blue color, then it's hot enough for you to just drop into the oil. Or when it starts to affect the fire, when the fire turns from a bluish color and turns into an orange like color when it hits the steel, then it's also hot enough for you to drop into the oil. So once that's hot enough, you just take it off the fire and just dunk it into the oil. And you're just gonna let that cool completely down to room temperature before you handle it. Wiping off the excess oil, we can see that this first pass did in fact work. The part that I was holding with the pliers, you could see it wasn't blued very much. And that's to be expected as the pliers did absorb most of the heat of the flame. So for the second pass, I'm holding it on the other side so I can get that part blued. The second pass is very similar to the first pass. You won't be able to see the layer of oxide because there's now a polymer layer over it. But once the fire starts turning orange, that's still a good sign that it's hot enough. You're just going to memorize how long it took for you to heat it up the first pass and basically just copy that. That's a very reliable way to tell if it's hot enough. Just dunk it into the oil again. Wiping off the excess oil from the second pass, you can see that the part is now completely blued. It's a little inconsistent in some parts. If that bothers you, you can and perform a third pass and a fourth pass and a fifth pass. You could do this for however much you want until you achieve the color that you want. More passes will give you a much darker hue, and it will also create a thicker layer of polymer to protect the metal from the atmosphere. Personally though, I thought 2 passes was enough for this part, so I just cleaned off the oil underneath the sink. If your part has any practical application, usually you want to just leave most of the oil on, as this will protect the part from rust as well. But I didn't feel like wearing an oily bracelet covered in fish grease, so I just cleaned it off. So yeah, that was a simple way to perform hot bluing. I hope that helped you, and see you later.